We are live. All right, Sondra, we're here to talk about our Upland clinic, which is next weekend, May 15th through 17th. That's going to be at Central Penn Sporting Clays, so you have to travel to us this time instead of us coming to you.
Okay.
So we're going to kind of be on our home turf, and we're really excited for this one. I just want to kind of go over some of the stuff that we're going to cover at that clinic, and then we'll talk about why we think that some of this stuff is important and why our approach to teaching these things can really help people. So the first thing, right, we're this clinic is for dogs and handlers of all skill levels. So if you're new, you have a puppy, whether that's your 10th puppy or your first puppy, doesn't matter. We can do things like game and gunfire introductions, building field search, those sorts of things. If you're at the intermediate level where your dog has plenty of drive, they understand why they're out there when you take them out to the field. They're hunting, they're doing all of those things appropriately. Hopefully, they've had at least a hunting season under their belt, and we can start working on yard work drills. So, teaching and enforcing whoa, using that skill to then teach stop to shot, stop to flush, these isolated behaviors that we need in order to have a dog that will be steady in the field once we move back into hunting or testing scenarios. And then that's the last part, right? Which is finishing work. So teaching these dogs to be steady through flush, shot, and fall, working on backing, proofing, because we know stuff comes up, especially at tests. You're trying to kick a bird and get it off the ground, and it's like running straight into your dog's mouth and those sorts of things, right? So we have to be able to handle and prepare for things that we hope don't happen, but hope is not a strategy, right? So we have to plan for these things and make sure that our dog is prepared for those things to happen. So, first, do you think I missed anything just in terms of content that we're going to cover?
Um, I think it can welcome more people that maybe have no familiarity with bird dogs. I mean, I'm sure you can attest to. I get a lot of people that this is their first hunting dog.
Yeah.
This is their first experience of going through the testing systems, right? Whether it be the German side or the American side. So, or just having a good old hunting companion. So, I want to make sure that people say, hey, don't be intimidated in thinking that everyone coming here has had, multiple dogs on their belt and they're coming in looking like semi-pros. Like most people are kind of, fine nuns going out there.
So I don't want to cut you off, but I just want to mention that very quickly that I think is one of the things that you and I have kind of both proven that we're pretty good at, right? Is taking these new handlers that are first time dog owners, helping them work through NAVDA and JGHV systems and get good results. We've had a number of people be successful in our tests with the Munsterlanders, and then you had some people like last year that did really, really well, right? I mean, I
Right.
think I
I've had
saw.
several over the last 3 years, and just recently got because everybody's having their annual meetings, so
Yeah,
nobody really knows what awards they're getting. Well, they kind of
right.
might, but like, you don't really know you're getting like high AZP dog,
Yeah,
or certain. I mean, I should have like seasonal lift, but I just they're not accolades that I feel like I'm collecting, but I'm proud to say that lots of first time handlers have gotten, national awards, high scoring dogs, AZP, DGP, prize one dogs. I have two dogs from my first um, EK litter that are going to the NAKP. Now, of course, they're not training under me, but they have absolutely um, been talked off the ledge from
sure,
me.
sure. Yep.
Like, don't do stupid shit. Well, one gentleman, he actually did a kind of like virtual tracking system, like
Yeah.
all through video training, because he lives up in Maine, and he ended up doing very good at his VGP. Yeah. So yeah, there's several accolades that I could say between DDs and DKs that I've done very well with.
Yeah, yeah, I remember, I think, is it Lori her name that got a high AZP dog? I remember when we were hanging out a lot last year, she was around training, with your group a
Okay.
lot. So that's
Okay.
really cool, and that's one of my favorite things to see is when folks that are new to this stuff, if you just can give them a good system, then they don't have this 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Stuff doesn't take that long, right? Especially with our dogs having to test at certain points in time, right? And we're sometimes on these compressed timelines. I think that you can get someone to reach these high levels of success very efficiently. I think is one of the things that we both value
I
from the
think
stuff
that
that we're
these just
doing.
need like logistically understand better understanding.
Yeah,
Um, it's like reading a book. Like, there's some books that, some people can't, analyze and logistically absorb. One of my friends, he's like, "You have a very good knack at, taking very complex things and explaining and breaking it down very simply for everyone." And
Yeah,
so
yeah,
it's a good compliment coming from, again, somebody that's in the education department. I was like, "Okay, good. Like, that's a good feature, but you got to be coachable."
yeah,
The best people are going to be people that, they're going to hear, okay, what you're doing wrong as a handler, how you can get better, maybe what your dog might be lacking, how to get it, a different trait from your dog. Coachability is a huge part.
yeah, yeah, for sure. And that so the next thing I wanna talk about is just a lot of what we try to do in these clinics is to give people a very clear process and kinda game plan moving forward for these different skill sets that they're working on with their dogs, and we feel like that's important because you and I have both spent a lot of time at club training days. And so without like, naming names and we got a little bit of criticism last time, like we were talking shit, but I think it's important that we can
Truth hurts, man.
well, that you can call a spade, and, like,
Yeah.
sometimes you look at stuff and it's just not ideal, right? And so, the thing that people have to remember is the dog pays the price while we're learning and fumbling through whatever we're doing, and a lot of this stuff where I think people spend a really long time, sometimes whole training seasons working on, like, one thing and still having trouble, it's because
The merry-go-round.
well, we just see a lot of like setting up test exercises and then just letting the dog keep running those things until they kind of figure it out, which is not the same thing as having a really intentional plan that builds sort of sequentially over time and all of that. So I just wanted to kind of call out these problems that we see and then we can kind of talk about each of those things. And the first one that I see a lot, and I'll kind of mention these two things together because they go together, is this idea that suppression is the same thing as obedience, right? So what we see a lot in field work is people have done a really good job of the drive building. They have dogs that are crazy about hunting. They love birds or hate birds, depending on how you want to look at it, right? And they're really out there getting after it. But then when we're trying to go through the steadiness process or get a handle on that dog in the field, um, like just these use of unclear sort of high level corrections that aren't really teaching the dog what to do as much as they are just
Well,
suppressing drive and creating a little bit of avoidance so that dogs are a little more careful when they're out in the field. And if you have a really strong dog, that's you can get away with that sometimes. But when people don't
or you could
have that,
struggle with it because
yeah,
they're strong. Yeah.
right. Or if they have a dog that really doesn't understand those corrections or maybe isn't strong enough to kind of just put their head down and deal with that and still be successful anyway, then this is where you see a lot of dogs start blinking birds and blinking launchers and things, right? They sort of associate all this pressure that they feel with these setups and then they
Too
kind of want to
mechanical.
avoid those things.
It's
Yeah.
not it's too mechanical. So, I mean, like, I think the caveat to that is there's compartments for everything, right? I don't think
Mhm.
enough times that, there's not a breakdown of tasks, and then in that task, there's several skill sets, right? There's several things within that task that dog, if you wanna have a clean, smooth work with it, you have to break it down into little puzzle pieces so you can put them together and it actually has a great picture. I think the compartments that well, again, what I typically see is it's kind of like there's a constant mechanism where people are in a test mindset and they want to do the
Yeah.
test plan, right?
Yeah.
So, okay. But the problem with that is they're not proofing and preparing for that test situation. So they get together, whatever it might be once a month, and they want to go through that test scenario because that's what they have to memorize.
Right.
But in the same sense, there's nothing to memorize in that testing that system, right?
Right.
Because nothing about it can be it can be situationally conditioned. So
Right.
you can go through that, and we talk about this in dog sport and competition world is we minutely teach specific skills and behaviors, and we proof, and we make sure before we're moving forward into the next task or the next stage that that compartment is very clear. And then there's no wrong going back to that compartment if there's this clarity somewhere down the line. Whereas
Yeah.
I see that a lot of people are like, well, I have to, after the shot, there has to be, I have to make the contact of the bird. I got to do a retrieve. Well, not if the dog's moving, right?
Right.
Yeah. Then what are you rewarded, right? Or here's what I say commonly is dogs not getting enough work to learn how to walk nicely and heel to even start.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that is my number one thing. Like if you can't get to the start line and
Right.
your dog's like a yo-yo and yanking you and you have to tell him heel 7 times, you're never gonna get there. Because I
Yeah.
look
They're,
at it like
they're like,
every time you do that, you're exchanging, and it's almost like you're dropping change out of your pocket. Like you're losing money.
right. Yeah.
Like, and if
Yeah.
I did it, like I tell a lot of clients, I said, if we did this like a money exchange, where every time you had to correct your dog or reset or change it, you would leave broke.
Yeah.
But if you
Right.
broke it down so that you didn't have to lose money, you leave rather lucratively rich. You would lose
Yeah.
anything,
Yeah,
right?
100%. This so, like,
So
you see that the forging, right, is a big one. You see dogs leaking terribly, so, like, just, like, vocalization that is just coming from, like,
that's a big
frustration,
compartment.
sort of, like, being
And
demanding, right?
yeah, and people aren't aware, like, that little leak of, "Ugh," when you let them out
Yeah,
the front door to go take a piss or a poop,
yeah,
you're rewarding that,
yeah.
right? And those little minute things build and build and build. Yeah.
And while people are doing all of that introductory work, the drive building stuff, if they don't have ways to control those pieces, then what they're not understanding is they're building all of that alongside their drive and they're creating bigger problems for themselves to fix later. So everything you just said, like we call it chunking. I've heard other people say like isolate, separate, and recombine. You're like taking the pieces out and working on them individually, and then you put them back together. And the smaller you break down those skills, then the easier it is to troubleshoot. And like you said, when you have a problem, then you can go, I know I can pinpoint exactly where that issue is, and then I can fix that thing, and then I can stick it back in the behavior chain, and then everything gets better, right? Versus when it's all just globbed together because you only ever taught the exercise,
Mhm.
then people have a lot of trouble kind of
They
being able
think
to
it's
parse
about
out
teaching the
the issue.
exercise. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Right. Another thing that I kind of talked about before, but I just want to touch on a little bit more is dogs that are unprepared for the corrections they receive in these different situations. And so, what I kind of see, especially, is with e collars. I have one e collar, it's the same point of contact on my neck, and that thing has meant heel and sit and down and whoa and fetch. And there's not enough clarity for the dog to understand what thing they were doing wrong or what they needed to do when they receive that feedback. So can you talk about how you make sure that dogs understand what their job is before you start trying to enforce compliance?
Yeah. You know, I think that kinda caveats with fading tools, the use of tools, the knowledge
Mhm.
of how you're using your tool, and what you formally taught. So most people haven't taught it completely. So then they bring in a tool because they wanna have to. They wanna the whole compliance word, right? They want the
Mhm.
dog to do the thing. And so when they correct it, what ends up happening is sometimes things like degrade or fall apart. And sometimes that needs to happen a little bit during certain stages of an understanding. But that's, again, there's little caveats to that. But again, when you kind of ask me this question, I think of guys that come with remote collars on their dogs and they're hitting them for the point, the retrieve. The dog's munching and they're hitting the button, but they never really have clarity to why the dog, or then again, the dog doesn't have clarity from the human of why it's being corrected. It's just being
Yeah.
corrected. So the dog's not able to analyze the correction space. It's kind of like I get the same. So it's like two separate worlds. You have like the one individual that's like, well, I don't want to be using food. I don't want to be reinforcing my dog forever. And I'm like, but then in the same sense, then you have the other person that's like button happy, right?
Yeah.
So like you have to say these have to balance so that both aren't relied on and you're not married to them. They have to be married at some point so that the dog can operantly understand why the correction's happening so he can fix it. The dog understands how he gets relief, then again, the correction can be useful. But my motto to a lot of people, and I always tell this line, is if you've corrected your dog more than twice and it has not fixed the issue, the correction is not going to solve the problem.
Yeah, it's not a correct correction because either
With everything too.
it wasn't intense enough to change the behavior or the dog doesn't understand it, so it doesn't matter if you make it more intense, it's not gonna work because they don't know what you're trying to communicate.
And most people come at corrections out of frustration. The
Yeah,
dog's not doing the thing that they envisioned the dog would
yeah,
understand to do, and they go and they
that's
panic, and then the dog's like, "What was that for?" Right?
that's the biggest one is people letting bullshit slide until they get pissed off about it, and then they drop the hammer on the dog,
Yeah.
and it's retaliation at that point. It's not a correction or a punishment. It's
What's the
not
thing they say? "My dog's so stubborn."
right.
I hear this at least a dozen times a week. "My dog's so stubborn." It could be somebody on the phone, whatever, an email. And I'm like, "Is he stubborn or is he uneducated?" Because very, very few, and I would say all dogs are not stubborn, right? There are determined dogs, there are resilient dogs, there are driven dogs, but they are not stubborn nor are they stupid. I love when people are like, how smart is my dog?" I'm like, "He's as smart as you want him to be." So, but when they say their dog's stubborn, it lets me understand them, the person, that they haven't taught him properly and they're blaming the dog for the very behavior that their dog is giving them. So when the dog's blowing them off or maybe giving a different, presentation, they go, "Yeah, he's stubborn. He's hard headed." I love that line. Woo!
Mhm.
That tells me again where you're at in your education level. Because if you tell me
Sure.
your dog's hard headed, I'm going to say, well, then so are you. Because then your dog doesn't understand what you want of them. And so you're saying it's his fault. Like, I want that resilience. Like, I want a dog that's so determined to learn, get what he gets out of it. Again, I got to solve the problem of what does the dog get out of it?
Right. So when people say dog is stubborn, dog is hard-headed, what I hear is very committed to the wrong thing. And so
Yeah, that's a
when
good
I
one.
talk to people about that, what I kind of try to let them know is your dog's showing you how committed they could be to the things you want them to do if you could explain yourself better and provide some sort of motivation for them to do that thing so they feel like the juice is worth the squeeze there, right? When somebody has a dog where they're really struggling in that way because they have a high level of commitment to misbehavior, it's just like, well, get your communication and your reinforcement right, and then you have
And
that
be
same
and
level of
very
commitment
true
to
about it.
what you want. Right.
Right. They have to be so the dog that's stubborn or hard headed most likely had variable degrees of what the human was like, satisfied with. So
Yeah.
they go, "Well, that's good. That's good. That's good enough." But is it
Yeah.
exact? Because a dog is exact. He's black and he's white. He's not gray. He's not kinda. He's not sorta. He's not maybe. He's not a little bit, right? And then you kind of gave your dog different degrees of your expectations, and then you're calling him stubborn. So when he gives
Right.
you different results, he's giving you a reflection of what you actually gave him an opportunity to learn from.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure. And I think that if people understood that their dogs are still sort of I think even though they don't have to survive anymore, right? They're still sort of governed by this survival
My
mindset.
dogs have to survive every day.
Right. But what I
They,
mean is like if this level is good enough, then I'm not gonna spend the extra energy to do it to this level
yeah,
because I might need that to put into something else later today, right? So
right.
it's only like when we raise the bar, we raise the standard for those things that the dog's gonna rise to the occasion for that stuff. Unfortunately, I think in our world with the sporting dogs is that that's where I think maybe there's not an appreciation or it's harder for people to appreciate some stuff like some of the precision that we see in other sports because they feel like there's not a lot of utility there. My response to that is usually more effort your dog has to put into all the stuff you're asking them to do, the less effort they have to spend on all the shit that you don't want them doing, right?
Yeah.
So it makes everything easier when you just raise the level of expectation for those things. The next one when we jotted down our little notes for this was a good one. I was really happy that you said it was anticipation because I think people have this problem with understanding that anticipation is the best thing early in the training process. Anticipation tells me that the dog is picking up what I'm putting down. It's letting me
Mhm.
know that they're enthusiastic about whatever we're working on. It lets me know they're getting it and that they're engaged and that they're participating in the training. And then later in training, it's the biggest pain in the ass and it's the thing that we have to try to get rid of, right? Because when dogs sort of go, okay, I see this thing, now run this program on autopilot, and they're not really thinking about what they're doing, then that's where we see all sorts of what we would call disobedience. And people will beat their head against the wall for months sometimes trying to fix problems where it's just like, if you just break the pattern,
Yeah.
then you wouldn't have anticipation. And then you would, it's the
Well,
stubbornness,
versions
right?
what's a common anticipation, right? Number one common anticipation that I see in versatile hunting dog stuff is two things. Well, three major things. One, for the bird
Yeah.
with the shot. Number one thing. Before that, it would be breaking the flush. But when I break all that down, it's always the shot, right? Breaking at the water for the duck
Mhm.
and the shot, leaking, right? And dog sports, we call it leaking drive because that's
Right.
exactly what it is, right? The dog is not able to cap or contain its anticipation and enthusiasm for the trait of the behavior and the exercise we're doing. A lot of people will correct the dog in that state. Well, sometimes you'll make it worse, right?
Right.
Because it's not something that needs to be extinguished, right? Necessarily. It needs something that needs to be deconditioned. So when I mean, this is something that you and I had like we were almost like in like this brain symbiosis last year because we had you guys prepping for invitational. We had
Yeah.
several dogs in our group that were prepping for fall testing, and they
Mhm.
were all kind of gearing towards this steady to shot, steady to retrieve, and one of the major things that we do in dog sport, we talk about it, in helper work, is we bring the helper to the dog. Instead of
Mhm.
releasing the dog so much for the bite or the bark or sometimes it's important that the reward is given to them, right?
Right.
And it's not that he gets the self rewarding behavior to break forward on the shot to get the retrieve, as much as the retrieve is highly rewarding. I mean, that's the end all be all. That's the grand finale, right? That's what the dog wants hard. Well, why don't you just unravel that and decondition that slightly enough where the dog is not anticipating the shot, the fall to retrieve? And a lot of the times we'll just bring the bird back to the dog and boom,
Yeah.
you still got to retrieve. You still work on, the ultimate discipline of, bringing the bird back to you and having a front. But I mean, it's not so much about to go out and come back. It's
Mhm.
sometimes usually about the end result.
Yeah, right. Yeah, for sure. I think so a lot of what we're talking about now is predictability, right? And so
Yeah.
in all these places, again, when we're looking at training as just the rule book says that the dog does A and then B happens and then C happens. And if I just practice A, then B, then C, and I do that over and over and over, then that's where that anticipation comes from. So we're just saying, one of the things we like to do is, okay, well, A happens and then B happens, and then there could be any number of things that happen after that, right? So we're just giving the dog multiple options so they can't go on autopilot. They have to kind of say, okay, A and then B, and now I have to wait for more information because it could be C or it could be C alternative one or it could be C alternative two, right? So like we kind of have to have them have that flow chart in their brain instead of it being so
Yeah.
linear.
And then the idea of like, there's great to stay linear, right? Because we were going to go into that, but it's important that a dog has an understanding of what random reward feels like. Like,
Yeah,
it can't always be right here, right now. Because then the
yeah,
dog's like, that's when leaking happens. And then you get bleed over from other behaviors because he didn't get the thing that he should have gotten at this state, and he gets frustration going into the next one. And
right,
that's how, like, a lot of the times I see testing unravel as the day goes further because the dog's not used to that variable reward
right.
or, not getting it all the time, right?
Yeah, yeah. Like you'll watch a field sequence unravel when so like the dog goes on point, flush the bird, and then your gunners miss. And
And the
like the
dog's
first
like,
one, that's fine. And then the second one that happens, then you see now the dog's taking a couple steps. And then by the third one, it's fallen apart. And so, yeah, so that's really important. And so making sure that we're changing our setup so that they're not predictable. We're changing the reinforcement on the back end so it's not predictable, and that we're kind of doing those things without creating conflict in the work that we're doing is kind of the next thing that I want to like lead
Well, a
into
big part of,
talking
like,
about.
what we're breaking, like, even though there's, like, a basic routine, right? You have the
Yeah.
search, you have the point, you have the flush, you have the shot, you have the fall, you have the retrieve. So, yes, there is a pattern, or I would say a routine, but the understanding is that all these things have a front half and a back half. So,
Mhm.
breaking those exercises apart allows, again, like, you can situationally make things, aware so that the dog can have variable points of reinforcement,
Yeah, yeah, for
right?
sure. For sure. I think the other thing that we see a lot is when people are working on those sequences, like we've talked a little bit already about different ways to use rewards. And there's a lot of different ways that we can manipulate how the dog receives the reward, where the reward is coming from, when in the sequence they get the reward. That's going to impact their behavior. But if we're not aware of those things, then all we think we can do is just correct them when they make a mistake, right? So what we're trying to articulate is there's more than you did it right, you get paid, you did it wrong, you get punished. And so helping people understand that stuff is another thing that we really like to focus on in these clinics that we're doing with people. I think what we get, the criticism or the feedback that I get sometimes is that we're overcomplicating things. And I think that when I hear that happen, or like when I hear that said, I think, no, I think you're dumbing it down too much. Right? I
Yeah.
think that this stuff that we're talking about, it's not things that we made up. It's not stuff that we're trying to talk about to be self-important or anything like that. It's just like, I mean, this is
I
stuff
can
that's exhibit.
remember I can remember when I first kinda came into the DKs 8, 9 years ago, and, first time testing my dogs, and I was with a group of DD guys, great group of guys, and, I rem and, I'm learning this system. I know how to
Yeah,
train dogs and how to create behaviors, I know all
sure.
these things, but I was still trying to understand, like, what do you need to see from this dog, and what does the dog need to do to succeed, right?
Right.
And I can remember, it was like a training day, and, my dogs went out for a duck search. I don't remember if it was a blind retrieve or a duck search, and they had their my thing is shaking, sorry. I'm getting passionate. And my duck, coming back with the duck, did my presentation, did it out, looked at my, what would have been as judges, and I looked at them and I said, "Are we done?" And they were like, "Yeah, yeah, that was, good, right?" And I was like, and I gave my dogs the duck back. Like, I was like, "Okay," and they could have the duck.
And
And I
everybody shit
And I
themselves.
walked off, and I walked to my truck, and I was like, and their jaws were like they were just like, "She gave the duck back to the dog." It was like the worst idea that they
Yeah,
ever could fathom, right?
right.
Now, I think it's great because now you see more people allowing their dogs to carry the duck back to the car, or at least carry it off so you can exchange it again. But,
Yeah,
do they formally understand why? I don't know. But what I like to see is that they at least adopted the idea, like, the dog can get something out of this. Like, it's not
yeah.
just your duck. Like, the dog, of course, needs to show discipline to let go, to not just grab the duck out of your hand. It's truly given back to the dog so the dog can take his game back and carry it back, because that encourages possession, is encouraged to carry. And again, the dog can get value out of the exercise, right? And so
That's the
that's
new
where, like, the end may not be the end for the dog, right? So he
right.
comes back, he retrieves, you say out, the judge says, "Thank you, handler, you're good." And as I'm walking off, I can let my dog carry the duck back. Now, there's a caveat to that because in the VGP, the judges are watching you in between every exercise. So if your dog drops the duck, they may make a note of that.
Not being obedient or retrieve or something.
Right. Right. So there are some caveats to that where I tell some handlers, I wouldn't have your dog carry it back today,
But that's
but
the
it is
that
something we encourage in training.
yeah, that goes back to what we were saying earlier about just some of this stuff is a little bit more nuanced, right? And
Yeah.
this happens with pet dogs, it happens with hunting dogs, it happens everywhere where it's like never let your dog on the couch, never let your dog walk through a door before you, never do this, never it's always a never, right? And it's like No, everything is more nuanced than that. So maybe don't give the dog the duck back if you have possession issues that you're still working through,
Mhm,
right? Maybe don't let your dog on the couch if they guard it when somebody else tries to sit down next to you. But like,
mhm.
there's all these places where there's these like wives' tales that just somebody says it to somebody else and that becomes law. And then as soon as you challenge it, then you're like the heretic in these situations, right?
I'm
And
a heretic.
the biggest one is still playing tug with hunting dogs,
Mhm.
right? And so to me, if I what we hear is if you play tug with a dog, it's going to make them hard mouth. It's going to make them crunch on birds.
Okay,
Pat
I can
Nolan.
just tell you right now, people's eyes are starting to twitch.
But I think I've talked about this one enough that anybody that watches this stuff, this isn't going to be new to them unless we have new folks. Like what I like Pat Nolan's line about this is if your dog is too dumb to know the difference between like a duck and a tug toy, you got bigger problems than hard mouth. Right. And the way
Mhm.
I look at it is dogs learn a lot through contrast. And so if I am going to at some point when they get frustrated or they get overexcited and they do start crunching on something a little bit and they shouldn't, if I taught them away from that high intensity situation, this is when you're allowed to do this with this object. And then over here, I need this nice, calm, light hold. Now we have two contrasting behaviors. It's like, how do I know what hot is if I don't know what cold is? And so
Mhm.
I have to, if I teach the dog both of those things, then I can say, hey, don't do that right now. And they know more precisely what I'm saying to them, right? Otherwise, if my dog's frustrated and that's why they're crunching on the duck, and then I start hitting them with an e-collar or correcting them in some other way, that probably increases frustration at that moment, which means it's getting crunchier, right? It's getting worse, not better. Same thing with arousal. If you have some of these very strong dogs and they're just excited and that's why their manners are getting poor, why would I try to teach them the appropriate way to behave in that most difficult situation? It's like their most prized possession. They're all jacked up. That's like the worst time to teach that. But if I teach it to them in a game of tug in my backyard, now I can control the intensity level, right? Like if I out them more often, we're not playing for so long, then they're not going to be as intense. If I put more rules on that game and I can maybe if I need to get after them a little bit with some correction, I'm doing that with a fire hose. I'm not doing that with a bird. So again, we're not creating
Yeah.
any conflict with game.
Well, and that's the thing is like most people, they think playing tug, because when you talk about it, they think immediately they envision playing tug with a bird, right? Like never, never do you or I advocate that, right?
Sure.
What I look at, like playing, teaching people how to play tug, one, fundamentally correct, two, so that you can meet a dog's primary needs. All dogs, all breeds use their mouth, right?
Right.
So what I try to educate people about is if I'm gonna educate my dog how to use his mouth, I'm gonna teach him how to use it powerfully, confidently, right? And again, some people say, well, this isn't bite sports. No, but you have an animal that uses his mouth for communication. So whether that be to bring game back to you or to pick up something small, he's got to know how to mitigate and use it so that he can adjust appropriately. I mean, you talk about, again, you kind of hit the note on the head when you said, if I have a very high driven dog, how am I going to come to that dog's level? Right? So you
Mhm.
have to find a way not to suppress the behavior. There we go back to suppression again,
Right.
and try to cut that genetic arousal in half. You need to say, okay, I'm going to teach you how to work with this. I mean, I have dogs that are big, bite, full mouth grip dogs. And I'm like, yeah, I see that in a puppy. And I'm like, that's my pick right there.
Yeah.
One, high possession. He's never going to drop the game. And as long as I can make that exchange worthy to the dog, I'm never going to have a conflict of getting that game back.
Right.
And most people don't look at it that way because they're constantly looking at it like game is theirs. And
Yeah.
that playing tug, or even, I'm sure you've seen it too, or they tell people, don't ever play ball with a retriever,
Mhm.
right? Like, I feel it's kind of where the lack of knowledge there is only because you have that people say never, that
Right.
never word. And it's like, again, it's like never playing with your kid, but saying, I need him to be a baseball champion, right? You got to play other sports. You can't just play baseball.
Yeah.
And I look at the dog's mouth again like a sword. I'm going to educate that dog's mouth. I'm going to make it like a samurai sword. So he knows, with all the power and all the drive, how to have some inhibition control, how to
Mhm.
actually be able to hold an egg and not crack it, right? To bite full, bite hard, pull powerfully, let go clearly, and then re-engage. Every
Right.
single one of my dogs, I do bite sports with. They
Mhm.
don't munch their game, right? So when
Right.
somebody, and I see this online, and I'm sure you can probably tell me the same page that we're talking about that talks about hard mouth dogs. And that tells me right there that dog's needs aren't being met, or the dog's
Yeah.
in a state of conflict and the dog hasn't been taught properly. There's so many different compartments that that dog's not being met. And so that's why the dog's doing this, right?
Right.
It's not because he's got a hard mouth, it's because he doesn't know how to use his mouth. That's
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
That is
Right.
it. So if I can teach him, it's like a language. Like dogs can't, other than their eyes and their ears and their body as a whole language, their mouth is another way that they can communicate.
Right. And I think the evidence of this is when you do participate in any of the bite sports and when you do keep dogs that part of your breeding program is like, I want to see that dog bites hard, is
Genetic,
high in protection, right?
genetic.
Then that's a genetic thing. Then to
Mhm.
have those dogs be able to also retrieve objects and not handle those objects that way is like our dog, we're not breeding sporting dogs for hard mouth or for hard biting.
Yeah,
You are with those dogs and you're still able to teach them nuance and difference between those things. And so if you can do it with a dog that is literally intentionally bred to have a hard mouth, then there's no excuse to not be able to do that with a dog that's not bred for that.
yeah. It's just to me, it's like a broad label. It's like people that say, "Well, my dog has separation anxiety." No, like all dogs have separation anxiety. They all have FOMO. They all
Right.
have attachment disorders because they want to be with humans. It's genetic. It's what makes them obedient and dog, right?
Yeah.
But when people say it's a hard mouth dog, or they have this again, it's a mislabeling to me.
Sure. I agree. I agree 100%. And then the last thing that we need to talk about for sure is because a lot of folks,
We
especially
can
in
talk
our
about this
area.
all day. Like, this is
Yeah, I know.
one of
I
my
know.
things that I mean, I've gotten into, like, passionate discussions on, like, porches with dudes with. Like, where they're just
Yeah.
like it's like, "Oh, okay. Well, you do you. It's okay." Like, go ahead.
Yeah. So the other thing that I just wanted to mention is, in our area, most people that we know that are training their dogs, they're using pen raised birds. And
Yeah,
so a lot of what I see when we go to club training days is bad birds and then setups that don't account for the fact that birds might not work exactly the way that we want. And so again, this is just a planning thing that I think I would expect people that do this a lot to know that those are possibilities and to have baked into their process ways to mitigate those problems before they happen. And so when I see dogs running birds down or just ripping birds off the ground because they're not flying, it's like there's some pretty simple stuff we can do to just make sure that doesn't happen. And a lot of the efficiency that you and I are always going for, because again, we're not just volunteering at these training days out of the kindness of our heart. Like we're making money doing this. And so that means I need to get a result in a certain amount of time or I start losing money. And I don't mean to make it sound like all businessy at this point, but the point is
not at all.
setbacks.
I'm more like, "We're wasting the dog's energy." God.
My point is setbacks fuck up your timeline.
Can
So with these situations where you see bad birds come up, mistakes in training just create inefficiency. They create setbacks, they create confusion, and the easiest way to not have to solve problems is to not create them in the first place. And so I think that's just the other benefit of coming to a clinic like this is to get a process, to get clarity around the places where we frequently see failure or difficulty or contention and just let people know that stuff ahead of time and then give them the strategies that they need so that when it comes up they just know what to do and they get to move on instead of having to like rack their brain or ride the struggle bus for a long period of time, right? They just get to say I was told this was going to happen. I know exactly what to do with it, and now we just get to move on, right? I just think that's so important, and it's the piece that until I had enough experience in these systems and kind of understanding the behaviors we were trying to create and the circumstances we were trying to make sure that they were reliable under, you have a hard time understanding that stuff. And then once, like we talked about this, when you're a trainer and you can reliably build behavior and proof those things, then once I know what my rubric is, then it's really easy to then make that process efficient. You know what I mean? And I think that's just the big difference between just always training as a hobbyist and then training as like, I got a timeline and I got to get this stuff done. Right. So I think that's a super important piece. And the other thing is we're not saying like don't go to club training days. What we are trying to say is if you go in there with a plan and you know it's solid and you know, okay, if this happens, I do this. And if that happens, I do that. And you know all of those potential like branches in your decision tree, then it's just going to make this go easier. And then you can go and have those extra sets of hands and have those extra people that you need to be able to train this stuff because it does turn into a team sport at
Yeah.
some point. And again, this is not foreign to anybody who does this training in any other venue. Like you do bite sport stuff. So you spend a lot of time preparing your dog. So the one day a month, maybe that you can have your decoy come, your dog's actually ready to get some shit done.
And we can get
Right.
this.
Right. If you feel like you can only train on that day, you would never finish a dog. Right? So like you have to know how you can do your homework at home, the fundamentals, do your yard work, do these things that you can do independently, have a plan in place so that when you have all those extra sets of hands, the infrastructure, the equipment, all of those sorts of things, how do I make best use of my time there? And then also then you become an asset to that group because anybody that attends those club days will tell you the worst part about them is they drag on forever. They're so inefficient. And
Yeah.
so if you can start modeling behavior of like, I came in, I have my shit together, I know what I'm supposed to do. Your job is this, your job is that, your job is that. Everybody good? Okay, go team. And then you just execute, right?
Yeah.
Then everything is better that way.
And then you get called the finger pointer. Yeah. I think having the plan is the biggest. I would tell anybody. I was like, I don't, again, people train with me and they have different training days. They go to this place and they have different training groups to go to that place. I'm like, that I think is great because it generalizes and broadens the dog's exposure and them as a handler, right? To be around different people that train differently. Just stick to what you know is working.
Yeah.
Don't, again, it's kind of like, well, I mean, it happens in dog sports too. People kind of like pop around at different seminars and clinics and they take this and they take that, but they don't really have a formal understanding of what they're really putting all together.
Yeah.
Um, I think that one, formally knowing what kind of system you're adopting, or formally saying, okay, this is where I'm at in my education level, then will allow you to say, okay, this is what I can get from this chapter. And when I say
Yeah.
chapter, I mean like read the book, not
Yeah.
a personal chapter, but too many people don't know how to analyze that and go, okay, I'm not ready to open up the whole book yet. So that's where you said, like, sometimes these training days are a little inefficient because there's that person showing up with their, I mean, I've experienced it. 6-month-old DK puppy and went to my first NAVDA training day because I intended to do NAVDA as well with the dog. And, you know, I was doing field searching and I whistle my puppy would turn and burn and come back to me and I'd feed it a little kibble or whatever I had in my hand and then send the dog back out to, the opposite side field search. And, my puppy came in, got into bird scent, gave her a point, they flushed the bird, and of course they shot the bird. Now, they didn't even ask me, where's your puppy at in its gun exposure? They didn't even ask me. And now I know my puppies enough. I knew they were going to be fine. But
Yeah.
there was no, like, forethought. There was
Right.
no, like, "Hey, what do you wanna do with your dog?" or "How do you wanna do this?" And I probably would've done a field search, maybe a little findy on a bird hotspot, let my puppy get birdie, and then, I might have let him go and point a bird, but not let him flush it and shoot it.
Right.
Now,
Right.
in that caveat, the moment that happened, my puppy, the puppy flushed it, They shot, it fell, and then my puppy was, like, kinda blown away, like,
Yeah.
"What?" And,
Yeah.
we were like, I sent my puppy I had to, like, actually travel with my puppy because my puppy was so little, they couldn't see the mark on where it landed, so we kinda, like,
Yeah.
had a
Yeah.
whole 'nother search to find its
Yeah.
bird, and, and then my puppy found the bird, and I leashed him up, and I just let him carry the bird out of the field, and I was intercepted before I got out of the field, and I exchanged the food for the bird, and that was a whole 'nother thing. These guys
Mhm.
were all, like, watching me, eyes wide, mouth open, like, "What's going on?" And because I was using food, and they, made sure to ask me, like, "Are you using food in the bird field?" "Yeah." Just using whistle exchange, redirection, just rewarding the behavior to come back
Yeah.
or connect with me. And, where was I going with this? The point being is, um, there was no plan. I was just brought out, "Yeah, we got a bird out there for your puppy." And I felt like it was like this assessment on my puppy. And I've actually heard this a lot where I've had people come to me after doing a training day and they like, smash the puppy into a bunch of birds and correct it and make it, like it's going to understand well,
Mhm.
right? Like, what are you doing? Like, that's where some things are a little, to me, more complicated than it needs to be. Necessarily, it kind of it deterred me from wanting to do anything again there.
Yeah, yeah, a common sequence of events there is, like, we just do the thing we always do, and then when there's a problem, we go, "Oh, shit," and then we have to go back and try to fix it instead of just being a
Why
little
did
bit
it
more
mess up?
careful on the
Yeah.
front end, right? And another thing that happens a lot is I think that a lot of people, they get used to having a way that they do things, and then if they're not really picking apart what works and what doesn't and why things work in whatever method or system they're trying to use, then they don't understand that these things that they think are just how dogs work or just it's part of the process. It's like, no, it's part
Right.
of your process because
Right.
the way you did step one is what made step seven fucked up for you, and you didn't even know that it was
You
going to
said
be
it
that
first.
way. I think that's like the fifth one, but my point is like if you're not examining those things and understanding how those pieces connect together, then you think
Well,
that those are
wouldn't
features, not bugs, and they're
wouldn't you
bugs in your
agree
code.
that most people, and yeah, and I love seeing more people, you guys included, that are learning more about playing tug with their dog and the nuances of this new age, and it's not even new age style training, it's just hunting dog world is just catching up. Like,
Yeah.
dog sport world is decades ahead, right? As
Mhm.
far as like the sciencey stuff and understanding the
Yeah.
nuances, and that dogs do not learn like humans, right? Like, I have to break it down to my pet dog people for them to understand you moving and talking at the same time doesn't merge like it does for a human to a dog.
Right.
So, like, move when something moves and then you talk, like, the dog only sees one or the other. It either hears it or it sees it. And if he sees it,
Right.
he doesn't hear it. So, I think that, even in the hunting dog world, just understanding that principle alone, that dogs do not learn like humans, I think if people just got a little bit more analytical and, I mean, dive into some sciencey shit, like, I mean, what do they say? That the world is your oyster, right? Is that what they
Yep.
say? Like, yeah, eat it up. Like, maybe it makes you sick, but like, the whole point is, I think that people have to get kind of out of their own way and say that there's a little bit funner ways to do all this than there is about making it like arduous and like kind of missionary, right? Like, there's always a funner version, is my
Right.
point.
Sure. No, I agree. Yeah, it's hard. A lot of this stuff, it's like it gets the term modern gets thrown around a lot like it's modern dog
This
training,
is
and I
dog
just always try to
training.
remind I
This is
just try to
fucking dog
remind
training.
people all of behavioral theory that modern dog trainers are using predates e-collars. So it's like if you're using an electronic collar, that's more modern than any of the stuff that we're kind of talking about, when we're talking about these different ways to use rewards and when we start talking about different forms of conditioning and those sorts of things. Like this is old settled science. It's not new age. It's not like we're not being crunchy hippies. Like it's legit stuff, you know?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the whole verge of like modern dog training, I mean, we have it going on heated right now between the whole, positive only dimension world. And then you have, the whole label of balanced dog training that's becoming like it's like this continual, who's right, who's wrong. You can't just stay in one version of something and keep telling yourself, if I keep recycling it, I'm gonna get a different outcome.
It
So
gets
it
it
gets
yeah,
kind of burnt out.
the labels I kind of stop even talking about them a whole lot anymore because I feel like at this point, two things. I think when I hear somebody say that they're a balance trainer, then what that usually means to me is that they're probably suppressing dogs instead of putting good obedience on them. And then when I hear people talk about being reward only, like, well, no, because as soon as you put a leash on the dog, you're exerting pressure on the dog. Or if you withhold a reward until you get a good response, then that would be negative punishment. So like you're still you can't be reward only. And then justifying either one of these things other than to just tell people why each of them are effective, like using compulsion and training or force or using rewards is like, why am I justifying how nature works to people?
Hmm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like you get cold, you move somewhere so that you're warm, right? If I'm standing in the shade and it's chilly, then I go walk out into the sun or vice versa. Right. And so it's like, I just, you get to this
You get
point
asked
where,
this you get asked, like, what I get asked a lot. Either I get asked, what's your belief in training?" Or they ask me, like, "What's your method?" Right? And it's like, I'm just a fucking dog trainer. Like, whatever works. Like, okay, obviously more bees get honey, so I'm gonna use something that's more beneficial to the dog first to teach, but eventually, like, we need to get this done, and I need to be free of my hands, and I need to be able to use my language and words. I mean, you kind of said it earlier that, the positive only crowd that are like, "Oh, I'm positive only," but they use a leash, right?
right.
That's an aversive.
Or
I
one of them
people
face
it's all
ripper mouth harness
or
things, you know?
yes, the head halting, right? It's all in some way, I think like I mean, the real professional trainers out there, the real people that are actually fucking changing worlds and doing a lot of dogs, they're not trying to name one version or another. They're out there
No.
doing it, and they've been doing it a long time, right? That's another thing. But it's all virtue signaling, right? So
Yeah.
whether somebody says I'm XY method of training, it's all virtual signal to me.
Yes, because
Right.
you're either saying like, "I think the dog always needs to be incentivized to do everything. There's gotta be like a cookie or a present on the other side." You're either that or
I
you're the
like
other person that
cookies.
me too, but like, it's either all that or you're saying like, "No, I think it's work ethic, and I think you should do it because it's the right thing to do or just off general principle." And it's like, no one works that way. And that's why I just try to say what I tell people is nature is my standard. And so if I can do at least as good as what real life would do, then I'm doing okay. But because
Yeah.
I have because I have thumbs and a big brain, I should be able to improve upon it a little bit if I can, right?
Well, yeah, like nurture. Well, again, most pet people, they don't understand methods anyway. So I just tell them, like,
Right.
listen, it's going to be nature versus nurture.
Yeah.
So as
Yeah.
long as you understand those two versions and you keep them very clear, you should do pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. Is there anything that we didn't talk about that you feel like we
Oh
need
my
to talk
gosh, I
about?
feel like, whenever we get like sitting down and chatting about all the things, it's like, we jump around at different subjects and then we're like, oh yeah, and then we go back. And so, I mean, I'm sure there's things that, and here's where people have to kind of jump in and welcome the discussion, right? Like, or, come out and audit the clinic. I mean, we welcome spectators, we welcome people to, raise the horn, ask the question, challenge the status quo. I mean, I'm all about learning, right? So if it's me learning from somebody else's experience, I put it in the back pocket, right? But
Yeah.
you know, uh, I'm excited to see. I mean, really, in the last 5 years, I would say legitimately in the last 5 years, I have seen more people changing a lot of their views on how they're training their hunting dogs.
Yeah,
More people getting into more food operant based training
yeah,
and trying. I mean, I see some people trying to understand the idea of playing tug with a dog, but sometimes I kind of like cringe in my eye, just like, and it's terrible technique because they're not truly understanding it. But at least they're trying, and
yeah,
I just tell people, I was like, match my effort. As long as you match my effort, we're golden. But
sure.
keep trying, keep searching, thirsting for knowledge, right? But yeah, I mean, I'm sure there's things we didn't touch on, but gosh darn
No,
it.
I think that's a good place to leave it is like if this is a thing that you're interested in and that you really enjoy doing, whether it's your career or your hobby or whatever the case may be, then it would stop being fun to me if there wasn't still more stuff to learn.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the thing is I like going and learning stuff from everybody. Our NAVDA chapter is doing a clinic with a wire hair breeder that's kind of in this area that is a really accomplished trainer in NAVDA, and I'm upset because it happens to be the same week that I'm going to see Forrest Mickey
Uh,
and Stuart
yeah.
Hilliard up your way. So I can't go to both, but I really would I would have really liked to have attended that as well. So yeah, so I think just the more information you get from different places, the more informed decisions you can make. I do think one of the things that we can help with that I think we're just kind of pretty good at is helping people have a good lens to evaluate advice that they get from different people. And so if we can kind of say to them, okay, if somebody's giving you advice on how they think you should run a training setup, then just walk through those steps in your head mentally first and see where that could go.
Yeah.
And then make a
Visualize it.
decision on whether or not it's good. Don't just get led around blindly and like hope for the best because that's usually when we see problems come up, right? So
Yeah. Don't be
um
blind.
yeah, for sure. All right, so one more time before we close out, Upland Clinic is next weekend. It's May 15th through 17th. If you want to order game, we'll probably have a little bit of extra, but if you want to order game, then I need you to sign up by Sunday.
Well, I mean,
So that we
and even we have a water clinic,
yes.
mentioning that's, I think, filling up fast.
Oh, that's good. I will pull up
But
the
that is another valuable weekend. I mean, again, like what we do is try to separate these abilities and these testing systems so that you can saturate behavior, right?
yeah.
So
So we
the
have
upland is strictly upland, it's strictly upland birds. I believe we're just going to do chucker, or we're going to do chucker and quail. Um, I don't know.
we
We
can
haven't
talk about it.
decided that,
I think
but
we
you
have
know,
options.
obviously the water weekend is going to be ducks. Of course, it's always more beneficial if the dog has a formal trained retrieve, but that
Mhm.
doesn't mean that you can't bring a puppy to get its first experience on water or its first experience with ducks. All things are viable.
Yes. So the Upland Clinic is next weekend, May 15th through 17th, and then our water clinic is June 19th through the 21st. That one's gonna be in Honesdale, Pennsylvania at Clemo,
Hmm.
a hunt club. And yeah, I think that that water one would be good for kind of anybody that wants to work on again that stuff from puppies all the way through finishing work. I think that once again for the water work, there's some sequencing stuff that can help people out if they can begin with the end in mind. Like if you know you're going to end up running your dog in HCP, VGP, something like that. If you know that if you're in the NAVDA side of things that you're going to want to go to the invitational, then like one of my recommendations is you should probably teach your blind retrieve before you build your duck search. I think
Yeah.
that when you have dogs do these
My
exercises,
recommendation is you better have really tight obedience
yeah,
for all of the blind sequence
yes,
before you do your duck
yeah.
sequence. Yeah.
That way you don't carry problems forward through your training for sure. And that's I think that's the point in both of those places is if you are trying to practice like that blind sequence, but then your dog is getting to be disobedient
And still do
and
it.
then if you get rewarded with the marked retrieve, then you are teaching them to be disobedient
Yeah.
because they are being reinforced with the mark retrieve. And then my point about the duck search is you're building this exercise that's full of independence and it's kind of like I won't call it undirected drive because they're searching intentionally and things, but it's way less structured of an exercise. And so I think that if people can build the elements of control in first, then they're not fighting that other skill set that they built, because those things do kind of conflict with each other. And so in those places, I just think it's helpful for folks to build that blind retrieve first. And I really like building my duck searches off of my blind retrieve. So I like to have
Yep.
the control first and then
Well,
allow that drive and
there's
the
that
independent.
sequence of reward too,
Mm. Yeah.
right? So we don't get to the water unless you can do perfect healing with me, right?
Yes.
We don't get sent for a duck unless you're quiet by my side and
Yeah.
marking where we're going. And then yeah, we don't get to go into the duck search until we've mastered the retrieve.
Yeah. There's points in time with the youngsters where we can either just like you can scoop them up and then put them into a training situation, or maybe we swap equipment and things so that we can prioritize some of this early, exposure to game and those sorts of things where they're not really, I think, old enough to have, super refined obedience. But then that window closes very young, right? Where you
Yeah.
have to start explaining to them, like, hey, you have to do these things in order to get to go do the things that you want to do.
Yeah.
And when you prepare the dogs that way, you definitely just deal with less problems later on. And we see this even in the young dogs when when dogs are running VJPs and HCPs, like those level tests, some dogs can't track because their tongue's hanging out of their face because they were dragging their handler around on a flat collar
Mhm.
the whole time. And so then when you go to cut them loose, they can't do anything
Yeah.
because
They can't breathe.
you right. And it's like if you just had a little bit of obedience, you could have saved them from their own youthful exuberance,
Mhm.
right? And they could have just done a better job if you could
Yeah.
just teach them like, hey, get your shit together and just chill out a little bit. Like you'll get a turn, but it's like you don't get to go run around the restaurant and eat off other people's plates, right? You don't get to like yell and scream and do somersaults and wrestle in
Well, you
church.
guys
Like,
see it a lot, like, well, maybe not with your group, but like when you first kind of came around NAVTA groups, is they would just let the handlers get kind of like pulled to the bird field, right? Like they wouldn't have. I mean, what I've seen is there wasn't a lot of obedience expectation to get to the bird field. Whereas like in my
yeah.
group, the only way you're going to get to that break line is if your dog is with you for a purpose. And again, there's a pattern of reward there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we start my one of my chapters, the way we would start every group training day was you'd get everybody in a circle and you would practice healing around the other dogs. And what that really was for most people was constantly yanking on my dog with a leash and a flat
Yeah.
collar, or like I'm jamming them a whole bunch with my wonder lead or my prong collar or whatever else I'm using. But what you didn't see a lot of was dogs that could just walk at a heel relaxed around other dogs without looking like they're barely hanging on in terms of like about to freak out, right? Or
Mhm.
fall apart. And then what you would see there when you try to so the hard part about going into these situations again is like you have a group of people coming together that all train differently. And so
Yeah, and they don't
everybody's in
practice these things unless it's at a training day. Because in their
everybody's in
mind, well, this isn't in tests. I remember getting
right.
that line all the time. Well, this I can't give them food in tests, but you're training out of tests so that
Yeah.
you can get to that point you don't need to do the thing, right? Or give
Yeah.
them the food or the ball or the reward. And they're not working on healing and walking around disturbances unless it's a training day.
Right.
Because to
Right.
them, training only happens there.
Right. Yes, you're right. At the point I was trying to make there is just I think it's important for people to go into those things knowing what success looks like and knowing what like ideal behavior looks like in their head so that they get to keep and maintain that standard even when they're looking at a bunch of other people that have very different standards for what they expect from their dog. And if you just go there and you allow yourself to be like just swept into what you just see everybody else doing, then expect the results that everybody else has, which to me
Yep.
seems like I spend an awful lot of time working really hard but not getting anywhere very fast. And like I'm cool with, I don't know, just getting a prize 2 or prize 3 with something and then calling it a day, and that's fine. Like, look, I'm not trying to yuck anybody else's yum, like, if that's what they like, but if you're coming into this and you wanna set a high standard for yourself, you set that high standard from the
And
beginning.
don't come back from it. Right.
There's a reason why the best trainers in those chapters often are not there at training day. It's
Mhm.
because it's inefficient and they can't,
And they
like,
know
they
better.
can't, it's
They
hard to
know.
operate in that environment, right? And so, like, I think for a lot of people, if you don't have your own little small group to train with, you need to use those environments to work well, but you have to make it work for you. Don't just show up and assume it's going to work for you, because you're gonna get as much bad advice and bad habits as good advice and good information. And so you have to be able to parse that stuff out and sift through it. And that's a skill set that coming to these things, we can help you evaluate. And again, me and you don't train the same.
Mm,
And
mhm.
it's similar because I think good dog training looks like good dog training.
We all
Oh,
want the same outcome is the point,
my fat pregnant dog just walked in to say hello. So yeah, so like we don't do everything exactly the same. We'll in the middle of these clinics sometimes say like clarify what you just said or show me that again, right? Or like we do things so that we understand what the other person's doing. And every person that comes doesn't necessarily do everything the way that we do either. And
though.
so what we're able to do though is take whatever you're doing, pick it apart and understand how it works or how it's supposed to work, and then give you feedback that is like targeted and catered to your specific dog, the way that you're doing things, and then
Well, you
doing
gotta be
these
able to
tools.
again, you gotta be able to effectively dissect it so that they
Yeah.
can take something home with it. Otherwise, they're just
Yes.
going through it.
And coming multiple days. The reason why we do these instead of it just being like a 3-day, we're going to do a high level overview of everything. The reason why we do these deep dives is because your term for this is saturation. And so when somebody comes and they work on a skill set today, and then they come back the next day, and then come back the next day, you'll see how fast these dogs progress because they got multiple sessions working on kind of the same thing. And then like if we pull that dog out 3, 4, 5 times in a day, and then they get put up so that they can kind of let that lesson soak in, that's way better than like, I just went and did the field work, and now I'm running over here and I'm doing this other thing, and then I'm running over here and doing this other thing. It's like the next thing sort of washes over the lesson that they had before, right? So I think just the way that this stuff is structured, everything is geared towards maximizing learning outcomes for the people and the dogs. And I think that's the real benefit of coming to these kind of events.
Right.
Cool. Anything else?
No, man, this is great.
All right, don't hang up. I'm going to hit stop, but don't hang up because we
Okay.
got to wait to make sure the stuff uploads.
All
All right,
right.
cool.